to start by introducing Prime Minister Timothy Harris of St. Kitts and Nevis and Minister Nicholas of the Technology Information Ministry of Antigua and Barbuda.
Good to be here.
Very good to be here as well. Good afternoon, everyone.
Excellent. Wait a second. Thank you. So, as you all know, the pandemic has grounded the world to a halt. What it has also done is, however, to demonstrate something that the Global Citizen Forum and I personally have been dictated and advocate that the world is perfectly interconnected. And this is not the future. This is the absolute present. And if there is one lesson that we have painfully learned from it, it's for global leaders, for countries and global institutions, as well as people in general, to work together and to collaborate on global challenges, because local solutions are not going to work. Today, we're gathered to discuss the driving force, which will be the core of rebuilding this world economically, sustainably after this pandemic, our mobility. Human mobility, the force that has been severely challenged in the last year, reminding us how detrimental it is for the global economy. We have created a tool called the Passport Index, which measures the human mobility, the access for different passports based on visa restrictions and COVID restrictions. As you can imagine, the numbers were drastically down last year. However, this is a great moment to discuss what countries are doing in order to prepare for the reopening and how economies will be depending on the access provided by mobility. Small island nations, where tourism represents a majority of the GDP, have been, of course, mostly hit by this pandemic economically. We have esteemed panelists, which we will discuss today, what exactly their countries and their leadership is doing in order to prepare those economies to return for a post-pandemic world. So without further delay, allow me to ask the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Mr. Harris. Prime Minister Harris, tell us about last year's economy and your plans of recovery for St. Kitts and Nevis.
Well, last year, as a result of the COVID-19, the economy of St. Kitts and Nevis, like most economies around the world, suffered a significant setback. And in fact, the GDP was projected by our central bank to have declined in double digits. And so the impact in terms of jobs has been significant. The impact in terms of the fiscal position of the government has also been significantly adverse. We are hoping that we are on the path now towards recovery of the economy as a result of some of the significant steps we took very early. One, we had a life-saving strategy, where for us as a government and a people, we said that we had to work to ensure that no one lost their lives as a result of COVID-19. St. Kitts and Nevis has achieved the target to date in that we have had a mere 44 confirmed cases of COVID-19, all fully recovered, no significant hospitalization, but most importantly, no one has died here. So we are among the safest destinations. We have attempted to do the necessary restructuring of every sector, from agriculture and fisheries to the manufacturing sectors, where we had to lay out new rules for the export manufacturing plants to be able to participate, enhance safety, and so on and so on. As we look towards 2021, we have about 90+% of all employees that were in manufacturing back to work. Our main challenge at this time, and the sector for the first quarter, has grown by about 12% over the first quarter 2020. So that for us has been significant. And we have grown in the area of the export market and of course in the production of electronics. Interestingly, last year, it was a factory here in St. Kitts and Nevis that was called upon by the White House to bring our employees out to assist in the production of parts required for ventilators. We look to tourism. That has been the mainstay of the economy, a real good driver of provider of foreign exchange. Since we had to impose the lockdown in March of 2020 for a considerable period until the end of October 2020, tourism basically came to a standstill. Not just here, but even in around the world, travel had been at one of the lowest. You may well be aware that the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, still have restrictions on cruise ships. Up to March 2020, St. Kitts and Nevis was on a record of being able to have over 1 million cruise visitors. 2 years before that, we succeeded in being designated a market port. So we were on a very strong growth trajectory, all of which became dismantled as a result of COVID-19. As we prepare, as we prepare for brighter days in tourism, we are cognizant that that in large measure is dependent upon the successful vaccination program in our source markets, United States of America, United Kingdom, and Canada. You're aware that there are trouble in several of these countries. Canada, in particular, over the last weekend, had been in lockdown in one of the key provinces, Ontario. So there are challenges to that. We have, however, been able in the last couple of months to achieve a new niche market in filmmaking. In that, for this year, 2020, as a result of our record and safety, the MSR productions out of the UK has determined 6 movies in St. Kitts. And before that, we had the Below Deck that had filmed a movie here in St. Kitts at the prestigious Park Hyatt. So for the first time, 7 movies will be filmed in St. Kitts and Nevis. We are seeing this as an opportunity that has come as a result of the pandemic and these high safety standards imposed here that give us international recognition. So we are working diligently to revive the sectors that matter: manufacturing, tourism, and of course our citizenship by investment program. All those sectors were impacted differently but significantly in a negative way as a result of the pandemic. And we are now doing the necessary rehabilitation work to ensure that when the world again is open fully to tourism activity, St. Kitts and Nevis will be the first place one would want to visit.
Thank you. Thank you. Indeed, that's great news and a great way to diversify from tourism to filmmaking, which still takes eventually maybe a couple of years down when the films are out, people to see and see what St. Kitts has to offer. It's a great advertisement tool. Minister, I know that within your ministry, of course, of information and technology, you are overseeing not necessarily the vaccine and the tourism, but the digital nomad visa, which was trying to attract exactly the kind of different level of foreigners coming to Antigua and Barbuda. How successful this has been, and what other tools are you encouraging to attract not only tourists but workers who would like to spend the next months working from Antigua and Barbuda? You're on mute, Minister. Thank you.
My apologies. You would recall that last year when COVID struck, each and every country like ours had to go through a period of shutdown in order to be able to maintain some degree of safety, but also to come to grips with the new reality of how to treat with COVID. Antigua was one of the first countries in the Caribbean to reopen its borders in May of last year. And as a result of that, we began to see a nominal amount of persons began to return to our shores. It peaked in December of last year when a number of our hotel sector workers and the number of the persons who returned to Antigua had begun to enjoy the benefits of a limited vacation in Antigua. because we actually had to employ certain protocols in that environment. We also, like Barbados, introduced the Nomad program, and we have had some successive take up of that initiative. There are a number of persons who have resided here in Antigua, many of them in timeshare, many of them in facilities that they would have had here before, and have pretty much relocated their families into a number of premium locations and have continued to do business on these shores. This, of course, has put an impact on the delivery of broadband services and has created more opportunities for expansion of our broadband program. As a matter of fact, even right now, as we're speaking, the local telco is furtively building out its fiber to the home program, not only for residential persons, but persons within the business community as well, who have seen an uptick in the demand for broadband services to support programs like what we're doing at the moment. So the Nomad program has worked very well. We have recently come off of a promotion in the UK. We'll be starting one in the US in a few short weeks. And the responses have been generally good. And so we are seeing a build-up of clientele for that particular offering.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Prime Minister Harris, during the beginning of the pandemic, what was the biggest challenge that you had to experience from shortages of bed and the medical system? Was it ready? Is the rollout of the vaccination and getting access to the vaccine, was it challenging as well? And how did the local business community reacted, and what kind of support did they needed from the government in order to go through these difficult months that we just finished?
Thank you. You will have to help me if I forget some of the questions. There are quite a few put. But generally, when we started dealing with the pandemic, we had a head start in that since about January, our chief medical officer, Dr. Hazel Odds, had in fact calculated that we were going to have a pandemic based on the information that was there. And they started planning among the health community long before we had our first case. Our health partners had begun public education exercises, had gone and visited some of the critical entities to prepare them, to pharmacies, get information on the stocks of some of the items she had determined that would be required, and basically generally began to engage the public sector and private sector, including our banks, about the potential risks that would be attended. And so I think very early we had very good responses to the non-pharmaceutical measures that had to be imposed. The wearing of masks, for example, and the sanitization, etc. All of these were well adhered to by the population. Of course, once we got the first case, we moved rapidly to close down the country for a prolonged period of time. And that, in fact, helped to keep the virus at bay. Our strategy, as advised by the health planner, was that we had to buy time in order to ensure that the health system was not overwhelmed. The life first strategy then is that we should be basically attempt our very best to keep it at bay until we had certain requirements, diagnostics, therapeutics, so that the health system was buffered. By the time the virus had come, we had already outreached to the government of Cuba, and we had a medical brigade of some 31 medical practitioners or thereabout on island to assist us in the fight against COVID-19. So being proactive helped, and I think that accounts to the fact that St. Kitts now stands perhaps as one of the few countries in the world that has not encountered one death as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And among the independent states, we certainly do have the least number of COVID cases. And that had to do with proactive planning. You asked about the involvement of the business sector. And I indicated a while ago that very early the health people had embraced the business community, had been talking to them because they were at the front line. The supermarket workers are at the front line of this. Those involved in our pharmacies would be at the front line of this. And so very early there had been an outreach. we adopted nationally what we call the all of society approach. And we brought in very early the business community, the Christian community or religious community, the public sector, and the NGO community. And so there were daily meetings of representative of these groups with healthy information flow that help, I think, with the coordination and a singular focus on some of the initiatives that the government had to take at the particular moment in time. So we have had good support from the business up to this moment, good support from the religious community. In fact, I should say those of faith were among the strongest supporters of the initiatives that the government had taken, including the lockdown. So generally, the early phases went exceedingly well, and the results are there to show for that. We are now in what we call the final element of our life-saving strategy, and that has always been that we had to get the vaccine, and once we get that, we had to work towards herd immunity. We started our vaccination rollout on or about the 22nd of February, and so we have been going about 7 or so weeks. During that period of time, we have covered about 35% of our target population. And so that is a relatively good pace at which we are going, although we want to get there faster. Because the sooner we get there, the more things, of course, we will be able to do. The singular challenge with the vaccine is that there is no equitable distribution of the vaccine. And we have seen a hoarding of vaccine by large countries with substantial purchasing power. And in fact, on whose soil these vaccines are produced have set up different forms of restrictions which have prevented the vaccines to come to small countries like those within the Caribbean states. As a result, CARICOM heads of government have issued a call that there should be more adherence to the commitment to the equitable distribution of the vaccines. Under the COVAX facility, which is largely a global alliance engaged in bringing vaccine to all countries, we have been able to secure about 20% of the vaccine needed for the country. Of course, that is still far apart, but it allowed us to make a very good start in terms of the rollout. And what we need now is to ensure through bilateral and multilateral diplomacy, we are able to get more. Truth be told, that all the small countries in the OECS, for example, we are still under a million. And so when you go to the market with small numbers, then you are at a significant disadvantage. Yes. It's going to require more discipline from our advanced countries, the USA, the Canada, the UK, the European Union, where there have been restrictions on the shipment of vaccine to allow for solidarity. You made the point in the opening statement. We are an interconnected world. Until all states are free of COVID-19, all of us remain vulnerable. And so we need to have a global solidarity. I personally would wish to see more global leadership from the new US presidency to ensure that vaccines are made available to more countries, and in particular those within the Caribbean region, because we are small in numbers. And if we can get to herd immunity, then we become, as it were, a test case where one can see the value of achieving that particular status. So that is where it is. And of course, without the vaccination being effective in our host countries and in our countries, then we have a dilemma with respect to our tourism development. So that is something of which we are highly concerned.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. Minister Nicholas, every crisis creates also an opportunity. And we have seen that in the citizenship by investment industry, which was very heavy on administrative and paperwork for clients to submit applications. Very fast, the citizenship by investment units in all the CARICOM countries converted into a digital transformation of applications. So the flow of funds from the citizenship by investment industry continue to support this economy in the crisis without delaying the physical paperwork that would have taken months and months of delay. As Minister of Technology and Transformation, do you see that as an opportunity to go and convert many other sectors of the administration into an e-government? Because the truth is, we have learned to work from home. We have learned to be much more digitalized in every aspect of the world, from passports and visas and e-visas. I believe that the next 5 years will go into those last sectors where administrative work and government work has been neglected from the digitalization and force you to implement new strategies. Can you tell us what exactly you see as an opportunity from your ministry?
Absolutely, and the whole function of digitalization falls to my ministry, as you correctly stated at the beginning. I think yes, COVID did present this opportunity, and what we're doing here in Antigua is literally putting all of the key functional areas of the government on a trajectory such that by the end of the year, we should have achieved that digitalization. And what that means is that the government will become joined up inside the space, and that all of our vital functions will be accessible online, and persons are going to be able to do business with the government online, which means that all of the functionaries within government, all of the registrars, all of the key heads of departments that have to sign off on documents are going to be able to do that digitally. The ministry at this particular point in time holds the position as the digital certificate authority for the government. And we are developing and will roll out shortly our own public key infrastructure. We will work with other certificate authorities to ensure that persons can, in fact, transact business with the government electronically. Last year, we would have gone to Parliament and would have amended the legislation to allow for the digital signatories to be point of fact in law. And so all of these regimes are now currently being put in place. And working through many of the agencies of the government, one of the indices that we tag ourselves against and look at on an annual basis is the Ease of Doing Business Index that is managed by the World Bank. Of course, recently they had some issues with the integrity of the regime from the World Bank level, but notwithstanding, we see the viability of continuing to measure ourselves against that particular indice. Even as I speak now, even obtaining construction permits working through one of our agencies, the Development Control Authority. We are a few short weeks away from putting that service online. And our customs and excise division has already been online. And more recently, we would have launched our civil registry, which would lead to the full issuance of digital identification for all our citizens and residents. And so I would say, Arton, by the end of the year, all of the major functions of government, including all of the business registries, the land registry, the civil registry, all of our registries will, of course, be online and be doing business with anyone who cares to do business with them in that digital environment. Of course, at the back end of this is going to mean resuming all of the public servants who have to provide these services, because the technology is I would say, the easier part. Change management that comes with the persons who are delivering these services digital. We're going to be able to do that. Now, of course, there are going to be some members of society that are still not yet digitally enabled, so we don't want to leave them behind. And we are certainly going to be providing a hybrid one-stop shopping environment for them to be able to continue to do business with government in a brick and mortar sense. But as they enter those facilities, we will then convert their applications into digital formats such that we can get the efficiency as well.
And how is the vaccination rollout going out? I know you have received about 40,000 vaccines, first stage in Antigua and Barbuda.
Yes.
What rates people are?
Well, I'm happy to see that internationally it's been recognized that Antigua finds itself in the top 20% of countries in the world that have really had an accelerated push for its vaccination of our population. We are nearing percent of our target number for vaccinations. We started at a similar time with St. Kitts as well, and we have just received word from our own pharmacy council that will give authorization for the Sputnik 5 vaccine, that they are a few short steps away from approving that from vaccine. You would be aware that we would have gotten a gift from a benefactor of some 1,000 of these vaccines. And yesterday, when we met at Cabinet, we had some indication that we have a commercial path towards purchasing an additional 50,000 of these COVID-5 vaccines, which would give us total quantum of vaccine that we would need to get to herd immunity by the end of the summer. So that looks very well. What we're trying to overcome with our vaccine program are some retarding issues in terms of some persons who are indifferent to taking the vaccines. And we had a break in momentum once we had the delay in the supply of the remaining vaccines, AstraZeneca vaccines, to the COVAX regime. They still have to present us with the remaining vaccines based on what we had ordered. And that should come in another 2 weeks. And once we're at that stage, we will accelerate our public education program and getting down at a minute level in the communities to ensure that we're going to be able to get 100% vaccines to get to herd immunity. This is going to be critical for us to be able to re-embrace our source markets, because they too are accelerating. And I'm sure at that point in time, when they get to their own levels of herd immunity, they will issue the particular travel advisories that they will only advise their citizens to attend to these countries where there is a similar degree of security in terms of herd immunity inside a particular jurisdiction. And so we are very confident that we will get there towards the end of the summer, and it forms a critical pillar in the rebuilding of our economy as we continue to look forward to the future.
Thank you, Minister. And a question for both of you, but I'll start with Prime Minister Harris. In terms of vaccination passport or certificates, I have been privileged to experience in the last months travel between Middle East and Europe. And the fact that you're vaccinated does not give, at this stage, absolutely any benefits to the travelers. Quarantine and COVID tests are still required by many countries. For the simple reason, the countries have not agreed yet on a single certification of these vaccinations. So a paper from one country is not recognized in another one as a certificate of vaccination because of the easiness of falsification and the fact that it's not digitally verified. As you know, there is 4 or 5 big projects, Common Pass, IATA Pass, who are trying to really bring technology and access to the governments to verify the vaccination certificates when a tourist is coming to your country. Have you thought about, or have you already started looking into each of these platforms, and what benefit would you give to vaccinated people coming to St. Kitts or Antigua and Barbuda?
It's a need which we are committed to following the science. And when we speak about vaccinated for us, it must be that where these are 2-dose regimens, that the person, the traveler, must have had 2 doses. So in most of the countries, and largely in the source markets, they have not reached a critical mass in terms of persons being fully vaccinated, though in some areas there are a significant number of persons who would have had their first shot. So in Canada, they've had their first shot, but Canada rollout has been largely ineffective up to this time. In America, they have done a reasonably well in getting people their first shot, but the numbers in terms of full vaccination are still very small. So that poses a challenge. In Israel, they have a different success story. In Seychelles, they have a different success story. And so that is important. And so the science is still trying to find its own settlement as to the full implications of vaccination, meaning someone fully vaccinated. What we do know, though, is that one has to incentivize the traveler who is fully vaccinated. And our own expert team is working diligently. We expect within a week or 2 for them to come with protocols in place that will allow us to give some relief to the traveler that is vaccinated. Again, because the science is still young, there have not been a lot of experience because most vaccination programs started in 2021. So we are talking about a limited roll of data over the last 4 months at best. In the context of St. Kitts and Nevis, we started about the 22nd of February. It's still too soon to see what the full impact of the vaccination program scientifically leads one with use. Just today, for example, Anguilla, close by, which has had a success in terms of the rollout of its vaccine, is now back in lockdown for 14-day period. And so it tells us that there's still a lot of fluidity in relation to the vaccines. And so one has to move in a cautious way, but still in a way that is practical. And we are attempting to achieve that difficult balance between protecting people's life, preventing the overwhelming of our health system, because that is a critical challenge. And everywhere, see what is happening in India, everywhere health system becomes overwhelmed, the natural consequence is death, because you can't deal with the numbers of persons who will require care in an effective way. So we are concerned about that being a tourism-dependent territory, and we are working hard. We're working hard with our health experts to find the best balance. But we are committed for there to be some reduction. As to the extent of it, perhaps by next week we'll be in a position to make a declaration with regard to that. And yes, there are things to be ironed out. The notion of the vaccine passport is still a matter over which countries have to agree. What will they accept as being a valid certificate being issued, and how will those, in fact, reach from one destination to the other? Will we have a common platform to push them through? So these things are still being thought through. They have been, in some areas, among limited number of countries, the creation of what we will call a bubble, where one country, for example, agree, I will accept this vaccination certificate from this country, and they will allow movement between their own people. So it's a work in progress. I want to go back very quickly, though, to what has the COVID-19 done to us in terms of our citizenship by investment program. And to say, luckily for us, we were one of the first to have begun the digitalization of our citizenship by investment program as far back as 2015. And we developed a system of 24/7 access digitally by service providers to the St. Kitts and Nevis citizenship program. During the pandemic, again, we adjusted the number of documents that had to be sent physically to allow the early processing of applications. Those documents were still required, but the processing was not withheld until all of those had come once they had been sent by the digital format. And subsequently, those came into the usual approaches. So it has been a significant realization that we have to become better and more nimble in how we process things. And from where we are able to do that, a lot of the work, we never close our CBI program. Indeed, in St. Kitts and Nevis, we consider the Citizenship by Investment program an essential service. And so while the country was in lockdown, those who work there, the senior officers in particular, were allowed freely to move to and from their workplace to ensure that we continue to be in touch with those who require the service.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. Minister?
Yes, and so insofar as the much anticipated vaccine passport, we as a country endorsed that. From the onset, once we started our vaccination program, we have ensured that our vaccine program can be presented digitally. And once the format and the platform is agreed to, there is a national, an international process of authenticating these vaccines. We are prepared to engage and to be a part of it. We see the value of it, and it's going to work well for our citizens as well. We are known to be significant travelers, particularly to friends and family who live in the diaspora, and it may become a larger requirement for persons to be able to travel. And indeed, we do not want our citizens to be at a disadvantage. So we are going to be in a position to offer up our representation of our vaccine program and to give authentication to the vaccines that our citizens will be able to travel with, to the certificates that they will be able to travel with, and it can be authenticated. I noted that you've mentioned 2 different platforms, and it's very likely that there could be multiple platforms once they share a common format, and our country is in a position to be able to do that. Similarly, we will want to be able to have the ability to read from those vaccine templates when they're presented. When our clients visit us for the purposes of application and for work, we should be able to examine their own digital certificate of those vaccines and to authenticate them as well. I would go as far as to say that insofar as the ability now for the country to move forward in this new round, we certainly are preparing to ensure that we can get that in the way that we're looking forward. As far as our own Citizens by Investment program is concerned, we continue to improve on the whole digital functionality of the Citizen Investment Unit, Citizen Investment Unit, to ensure that whatever contact is made, that utilizing the digital platforms that are now available, we can certainly ease the way that we do business.
Thank you. And one last question. We have covered most of the question asked by the audience, but I'll finish with one that will let us dream a little bit. So what is the one thing that will be different in the post-pandemic world in your country? Prime Minister.
Well, I would say everything will be different. And in particular, there will be, of course, a greater hype, a greater interest with regard to the safety of places in terms of the pandemic. And St. Kitts and Nevis wants to be among the very best in that regard. And that is why we have been able to contain the pandemic so very well. That is why we remain absolutely open to continue to do business. And those who are interested in finding a country that is safe and in which property rights are well respected, in which the country is on a growth path, we said to them that St. Kitts and Nevis is a place to invest.
Thank you. Minister?
I would say that 2 things have become very prominent because of COVID. One, health and safety. Anyone traveling through the jurisdiction are going to be exposed to increased risk because of COVID, because of any derivative from COVID that might be an issue. And so one of the things that persons are going to want to know, if I get into a jurisdiction and I do get ill, it's a question of the cruise lines, for example, have asked, what is the health infrastructure like in that country? And over the last 5 years, the government of Antigua and Barbuda has invested heavily in our health sector. One of the areas that we built out was an infectious diseases center within the last year to cope with COVID. And we have seen a tremendous improvement in the level of health services that we are able to provide in this market, and we're not done yet. And so we are anticipating both for our citizens and for part-time to short-term visitors, whether they be tourists or cruise ship passengers, or for persons who choose to live here to work, like our nomad visitors. We want to ensure that they have the comfort of knowing that in this particular environment, the health and safety is of particular concern. So we are going to be emphasizing health and safety as part of what our jurisdiction offers as well for persons who visit this particular environment. The other thing that changes would be the whole question of working digital. And this is a big change, and it has created certain social upheavals. I find that because we are now able to work more like this, there is a greater demand on one's time, and so we are working more across time zones, and so we have to build in within this certain other disruptions that we can enjoy life a bit more. But I think this is going to create a greater demand on time because of the whole digital accessibility of each other in this particular
Thank you very much, both of you. Fortunately, we have reached our time, so we cannot take more questions, but it was a pleasure to have you, to see you, and to speak to you again. I agree with you that all these challenges are also an opportunity for countries like St. Kitts and Nevis and Antigua and Barbuda to redefine themselves, to reinvent themselves, to embrace technology and diversify their economies with new ways that maybe we didn't think about 2 years ago. So I'm sure that with the leadership of those countries, as you represent so well, you will come out stronger, more sustainable, and well diversified. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for the audience, and hopefully see you in November in the Web Summit in Portugal, in person.
In person.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Minister. See you soon.